If you gave me Usain Bolt right now, I think we could make him faster. Like you could give it to me, not even like Nowdy or like the best practitioner in the world. You could give him to me right now and he could nix most of that stuff and we could probably make him faster.
When you're doing a squat, you have weight on 2 feet. You're not moving forward or backwards. You're not rotating your ribs. And then when you're running, you're doing almost the exact opposite. Weight is going to be completely on one leg. Your ribs are going to be rotated. Your hips are going to rotate. The hamstrings don't just like bend and flex the knee. They do a lot of other things. It's not just knee flexion, right?
And it seems like you guys are after function, functionality. People maybe getting out of something that somebody may call dysfunction. I guess maybe... what in your opinions would be like dysfunction? Is dysfunction always associated with a symptom, or is dysfunction like just a poor movement pattern perhaps that might down the road end up leading to something?
I think you have to define what function is first. So, and to be able to define function, you have to have a context. So function for a dog is different than function for a human. In terms of movement, it's different than function for a bird. So we have to say, okay, what's functional for a human? And what Mike was talking about with, okay, we stand on 2 feet, we reciprocate our feet as we walk, we rotate our ribs. There's certain things that why our muscles are built a certain way in our bodies, and we have to respect that. So when you're talking about functional movement or function, then it has to go back and relate to gait. So I think when you're talking about dysfunction, whatever is disconnecting you from that, or whatever is, I guess you would say, degrading your ability to move like a human, then I guess you can classify as a dysfunction, whether that's whatever you're doing movement-wise or whatever you're doing, say, like if you're eating something that has lead in it, that's going to be dysfunctional, right? If you're eating something with arsenic, it's probably going to kill you, so it's going to be dysfunctional. So it's not just movement based, but also like the way you think about something. There's information you can consume that can be dysfunctional, that cannot relate to well-being in terms of you being a human. And again, you have to relate it to the context. Humans in society right now, I think you can define what function is and go from there.
So with that context and that definition of everything relating back to proper human movement, it has to progress your ability to move as a better human being. Things like excessive amounts of powerlifting, things like excessive amounts of bodybuilding are inherently dysfunctional when taken to a certain level.
I wouldn't say taken to a certain level. I would say there's some movements in themselves that completely erode the function. Like if you're thinking about putting weight a certain way on your spine, like like when you're loading your spine in a certain way, or when you're
loading the spine with a squat,
actual loading, or even like when you're doing like a deadlift, there's not really a bar in nature that you're gonna have to lift, right? There's an object, you're gonna have to approach it a certain way and lift it a certain way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't think it's just a certain level. Maybe that level is very low, but I think just in general, there are some movements that you can classify as dysfunctional based on that they don't really respect, or they end up degrading the body. I think it's just some of the people that are drawn to those practices, they tend to be more resilient, so they can get away with more. But I didn't do too much of the power cleans or stuff like that, but I did the back squats, deadlifts, bench press. By the time I was 22, I was done. I think, Mike, you had the same experience, right?
Absolutely. And we also feel like the negative externalities of the exercise outweighs the benefits that you could get, because we would say that, okay, well, maybe there's not it's not zero in terms of the benefits that you may get from a back squat or a deadlift, but especially over time. And for some individuals, the threshold is very low where they'll hurt themselves with even like a light amount of weight on their spine or whatever the case may be. You know what I'm saying? So, but just also that's important to note, because we're also saying like every exercise in functional patterns is not necessarily optimal yet. We're moving. That's why the method is continually evolving. We're trying to make it to a point where there are essentially zero negative externalities with the exercise, and it is only optimizing your ability to, walk, run, and throw, or, enhancing also the other derivative movement patterns of gait.
Why would something like a squat or a deadlift be, bad or dysfunctional when those are normal human movements, like a hip hinge, right? A squat. Is
Sure.
it because of the way that we're loading it? Because of as you were mentioning, the barbell?
That's part of it. Yeah.
Is that a big piece of the puzzle?
That is a big piece of the puzzle, particularly the deadlift, because of the shearing load by the time you get to beyond like the midpoint, the shearing load on the spine. Also the nature of it being a bilateral movement and doing that. And, it's because of when we look at gait as the blueprint, it's like, okay, well, what about like a broad jump, or what about when, people do like a bilateral jump in basketball or something like that. And it's like, well, even then there are aspects of that and rotations happening like in your joints that aren't happening when you're doing something like a back squat or a deadlift. So let's say everybody has a scoliosis to a certain degree, like you, Mark, you were talking about. So what exactly is a dysfunction? I think Rodney also went into like understanding that it's also dysfunctional patterns of behavior overall. It like becomes a whole kind of life philosophy, but also when it comes to just like on a basic level, what is a dysfunction? Okay, well, like a hip shift, or a scoliotic pattern, or a knee valgus in a certain context, or et cetera, et cetera. So if you take those dysfunctions and then you hammer bilateral movements under heavy load, then you end up getting you end up having problems with that. And typically it results in injury. And when that happens just depends on the individual.
I think many people are listening are probably already getting mad. But I think bear with us a little bit, because if you are listening and you've participated in bench press, squats, and deadlifts, you most likely got hurt from those exercises, or got hurt on your way to, strengthening those exercises. And that's exactly why you guys are here today. For me, I really just like to think about stuff, a little bit outside the box. I like to have a white belt mentality. I only know what I know. And that's all I can know, right? Until I continue to try to expand and try to open up my mind into possibilities of other things. The stuff that you guys showed us today was absolutely phenomenal. You showed us some exercises in the gym. You feel them. So it's when somebody, jiu-jitsu, I think is like the ultimate example. Does jiu-jitsu work? UFC 1, you saw the results of what jiu-jitsu is.
Yep.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu at that time, it was almost completely unstoppable. And Royce Gracie defeated everybody, I think, for the first at least 2 UFCs. And so I think that, I'm always in search of, is there a jiu-jitsu out there of lifting? Is there a jiu-jitsu out there of exercise, of fitness? And maybe there's not. Maybe there's not like one, straight modality, maybe even along with functional patterns. Maybe it would be good if you played a sport or did something else that would elicit coordination and maybe some other things that maybe possibly you're not getting from just one aspect of functional patterns or anything else, because a lot of times we tend to box ourselves into what we call a gym. Mm-hmm. And then we're not really thinking outside of the box. But a lot of what you guys have been communicating about, a lot of the founder, Naudi Aguilar, has been talking about things like sprinting and what a powerful exercise that is. And we just kind of forget about that as an exercise, but that is kind of the master exercise in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if you asked anyone, do you prefer to be able to deadlift 1,000 pounds or run faster than Usain Bolt? It's like most people would probably say run faster than Usain Bolt.
I'd say that.
Yeah.
I agree. And let's talk about that a little deeper. That's actually a really cool question. Mm-hmm. Now, one person might say, hey, the 1,000-pound deadlift sounds bitchin' because I would be big and massive. But you're going to be big and massive. Like, you're going to be big and massive.
And
right?
then what are the negative externalities that come along for the
Yeah, and I'd rather have Usain Bolt's 6'5", And so I think that if you think about what someone's going to build in accordance to being the fastest man in the world, in accordance to being the strongest man in the world, they're going to be, and each person can kind of pick whatever one they want. But
yeah, I think people tend to forget too that to be able to run like Usain Bolt or faster than him, the amount of force that he's able to produce to get to that speed is, if not the same or more than what you would have to produce when you're lifting 1,000 pounds.
And then just considering the said principle, if we are kind of understanding gait as the blueprint, the specific adaptations to impose demand, the person that chooses Usain or to be like Usain ends up having more transferability. So that's what when you were talking about, Mark, about what else is outside of functional patterns. I understand what you're saying, but what I think is that you will already get that transferability into different sports. And so, because I know a lot of times people will look at functional patterns and they're like, well, they're exclusive, for example. And you got where you
can't just do one thing.
You can't just do one thing. It's like it cannot just be one thing. But really, what it is that functional patterns isn't really the one thing. You have a combination of physics that gets you the opportunity. You initially consolidate so that way you can then spread out. But there is always going to be a reference point in physics. So we are just non-compromising on that reference point. We try to stay intellectually honest about the fact, okay, well, just from a physics standpoint, if based on the said principle, if it's not leading me more towards sprinting like Usain, then it's not getting as much transferability into the function of my everyday life.
I have a question for you, because Usain Bolt is put forward as the great avatar, right?
Sure.
And he is, because he's the fastest man we know in human history. But he did a lot of things. And there is footage out there of Usain Bolt lifting weights, which helped his power output, right? So my curiosity is, I know that aspects of lifting can lead to dysfunction. Like we were talking about the 1,000-pound squat. When you get yourself to squatting 1,000 pounds, the level of movement ability that you probably lose is phenomenal. It's like, there's no way you're going to even attempt to sprint. You're going to pull everything, right? But at the same time, Usain was able to achieve that level with some resistance training. So it gets me to wonder, when I think about all this, I totally agree with you guys. And that's why when I asked you the question about bodybuilding and powerlifting before, I was like, taken to a certain level, because in my belief, from what I know and what I've experienced, what I've helped people do, it's like we can build tissue and then express that in sport and still have amazing movement ability. But there's a level that the gym shouldn't be the sport, So I'm wondering, why do we label these movements dysfunctional? Whereas I think it's more so how far we take these movements as far as the intensity and the load.
Yeah, with that, I think what you're talking about is a certain percentage of people that may have some benefit from those things. Mm-hmm. Like if you're thinking of Usain Bolt, mm-hmm. Did he succeed because of the deadlifts, or did he succeed despite them? So
I don't know if we'll know that, though. A constant thing that's been beneficial for all of our health has been intaking enough protein, but also intaking quality protein. And that's why we've been partnering with Good Life Proteins for years now. Good Life not only sells Piedmontese beef, which is our favorite beef, and the main reason why it's our favorite is because they have cuts of meat that have higher fat content, like their ribeyes and their chuck eyes, but they also have cuts of meat like their flat iron. Andrew, what's the macros on the flat iron?
Yeah, dude. So the flat iron has 23 grams of protein, only 2 grams of fat. But check this out. Their grass-fed sirloin essentially has no fat and 27 grams of protein.
There we go. So whether you're dieting and you want lower fat cuts or higher fat cuts, that's there. But you can also get yourself chicken. You can get yourself fish. You can get yourself scallops. You can get yourself all types of different meats. And I really suggest going to Good Life and venturing in and maybe playing around with your proteins. I mean, going back to the red meat, there's picanha.
All kinds of stuff.
Chorizo sausage. There's maple bacon.
What? That stuff's incredible.
The maple bacon is so good.
Maple bacon's really good.
Yo, my girl put those in these bell peppers with a steak and chicken. And oh my God, it was so good. But either way, guys, protein is essential. And the Good Life is the place where you can get all of your high quality proteins. So Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, you can head over to goodlifeproteins.com and enter promo code POWERPROJECT to save 20% off your entire order. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
Yes, but you can also look at many other athletes like Bo Jackson, Barry Sanders. Like when you see all these athletes that excel or that move really well, you start to see common things, and it's like when you look at everyone else doing the deadlifts and the squats, like why aren't they moving like them?
But I mean, for every Bo Jackson, I'm not a football watcher, but there's another amazing running back that does use resistance training. So the thing is, again, I get what you're saying, because Bo was famously known for like just doing calisthenics,
Sure.
right? And he didn't really lift weights,
Sure.
right? But then there's other running backs, other wide receivers that did lift, and they are also amazing movers, right? So that's the thing where like we can pull the examples of the people that didn't, but we can also pull the examples of people successfully that did.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, so I would say we don't attribute the deadlifts based
And
on
I'm not using deadlifts. I'm not saying
or
deadlifts
the powerlifting.
I'm just talking about just lifting and lifting in general.
Sure,
Because I'm not
sure.
saying
Yes,
that
yes.
I don't necessarily think that the deadlift is the greatest movement ever. I don't really
Sure.
do normal deadlifts. I don't. But at the same time, you know, there are other movements in the gym that, again, people do. Squat athletes do use these movements, and they're still, it helps them produce power, helps them build mass.
I think it helps them and they're able to extract or they get some benefit. But I think what we're trying to say is, okay, that's good that it helps them, but what about everyone? Like what about the
Everyone else.
99% of the population?
Yeah,
I got you.
And I see what you're saying. You're not necessarily saying to like, oh, if you deadlift and squat, then you're going to move like a Barry Sanders. Like I don't think you're fully attributing the resistance training to their success in a complete way. You're saying there's a certain percentage that's assisting them to getting a certain force output or strengthen their hips or whatever the case may be. But, you know, with what you guys experienced today, you know, we're still going to be crossing over that threshold eventually. I just started training Amir Abdullah, and he's got a 10-year, you know, track record in the NFL. But, you know, he was starting to feel the, you know, he's somebody like, it's very interesting too, because you're talking about the back squats and stuff like that. And I don't even know how much of that he was doing. I think he was already starting to fake the strength and conditioning a little bit, because he was like, it doesn't really make me feel good. When we initially had our conversation, he was like, I feel like I've always just gotten stronger from running and sprinting and jumping and stuff. Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, okay. And then there were a part recently was like, you know, actually I felt my lower back a little bit during this like strength and conditioning workout we did, or it was just running routes actually. And I said, well, were you getting a lower back pump? He was like, yeah. And it's like, you think about that. And it's like, there are people that I have in session 1 where I put them in a hinge and they're getting a lower back pump. And then here I am with this NFL player and he's getting this compensatory lower back pump. I don't want to say that a lower back pump's like always bad or whatever the case may be, but this was clearly like, okay, I'm getting tired and I'm starting to compensate. My lower back's getting turned on. Now I have sciatica again. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, okay, well, you know, based on the movements that we did, for example, it's like even somebody at that level and like the genetic differential between somebody like him and your average person is like a 10x, a 50x in some instances. So, and he's still getting a lower back pump running routes. It's like, so I see what you're saying. We're not going to know, like in terms of, you know, time will tell. But we have to look at things in probabilities. You know what I'm saying? Like there is a probability based on the physics of this stuff, based on the amount of muscle burn and the amount of potentiation that I can get in somebody's posterior chain without nearly that much load, that will end up enhancing their practice way more than a barbell back squat or a dead or resistance training, because we're using resistance. So let it be known what we're doing in functional patterns is resistance training.
I had 20 pounds on there when we were working in there.
That's what,
I was
exactly.
shaking,
Yeah,
bro.
see, you
I was
get
shaking.
it. Yeah, you get it.
You were like, oh, it's
So
heavy.
We
Just
can
20 pounds.
really potentiate that stuff. We can really potentiate that posterior chain and your whole body very globally and in a way that will integrate into your performance that that more closely respects the SAID principle. That's really what it comes down to. So let me just sum that up real quick. The SAID principle, I think the theory is that you have, like, if you gave me LeBron, if you gave me Usain Bolt right now, I think we could make him faster. Like, you could give it to me, not even like Naudi or like the best practitioner in the world. You could give him to me right now, and he could nix most of that stuff, and we could probably make him faster because of that genetic potential as well.
You know, I think I find these conversations to be amazing because, you know, it just kind of blows up so much of what we've known. But I think you're going to continue to see weight rooms across the country continue to change and to continue to evolve. And we have seen that. We've seen it time and time again. There used to be quite a bit of machines years ago. Now there's a little less machines, and there's then they shifted to like free weights, and now they're trying to like incorporate some other pieces of technology in some of these gyms. So it's constantly evolving, and a lot of it has to do with we don't really know. We don't really truly know what does make someone bigger, stronger, faster. Like we know some stuff, and the strength coaches that are currently out there have learned X, Y, and Z, and then they teach that. They teach, you know, some principles of powerlifting, some principles of weightlifting, some bodybuilding, and conditioning part is usually kind of unfortunately shoved off to the side. And you see guys working out like Christian McCaffrey, and you see even some of the stuff we saw from Bolt right there. You are seeing them lift, but it's like what percentage of their workout is really dedicated to like a lot of lifting? And just my own experience and knowing a lot of professional athletes, they'll do the squats, they'll do some of these movements. They don't really enjoy them. They're not normally very proficient at them. A lot of times they kind of gripe about it because they're like, I think it just like opens me up to injury. But at the same token, I know a handful of other guys who really swear by the squats and swear. So it seems to be kind of an individual basis for some of these folks, but it just leaves us in a confusing position of what the hell's really working. And we think about something like the hamstrings, like if you're thinking with someone that's sprinting, like let's hypothetically say that we know for sure that strengthening the hamstrings helps you run faster. Well, sometimes all that we can think about from an old school perspective is let's get the guy doing some types of leg curls. How about some stiff leg deadlifts? And we're going to overload these muscle tissues this way. This is going to make us stronger, and this is going to assist us in this particular practice. But the functional pattern stance, I don't think believes in that practice. And I think that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe that you guys are more of the belief that you have a better way to get into those hamstrings and to get into those muscles that maybe don't require you to, you know, get that lay face down on a leg curl machine, or even do a glute ham raise or the Nordic, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, just think about it this way. When you're something like you're doing a squat, you have weight on 2 feet. You're not moving forward or backwards. You're not rotating your ribs. And then when you're running, you're doing almost the exact opposite. Your weight is going to be completely on one leg. Your ribs are going to be rotated. Your hips are going to rotate. So the hamstrings don't just like bend and flex the knee. They do a lot of other things, and they work with different. It's not just knee flexion, right? So they do a lot more. So if you're just training the hamstrings with the leg curl or whatever else, or maybe you're doing different sorts of things to account for the different functions, but until you account for all those at the same time as it's happening during gait, the probabilities are, or maybe just the actual output that you're going to get from respecting the set principle versus not, it's going to be way higher, much less risk of injury as well.
In my head, just what came to mind was something like a step up. It's like, well, now you change the dynamic of you're trying to, you know, someone in the weight room still wants to overload. They still believe that some of these methods of normal strength training, instead of, excuse the term, but you guys hear it all the time, of twirling around with a bunch of weights,
Sure.
you know, and cables and stuff like that. Somebody still wants to get after it. So maybe a weighted step up or a weighted walking lunge or something might.
That's going to be way less risky than doing a squat for sure.
If you enjoyed this episode, which I know you did because you got this far, then click this one right here because you'll enjoy this one just as much. And if you're choosing to still listen to me currently as I'm telling you to go over here and watch this video, well, hey, that just means you like the sound of my voice. And well, I'll just keep seducing you right here. Hello.